To the Marvelous Land of Oz, Part 1. Looking at this cover, I know what you're thinking. That guy looks familiar. He looks like Jack Skellington. And you would be correct. Jack Skellington was actually inspired by this character, Jack Pumpkinhead. However, Tim Burton, as far as I know, hasn't read this book. He was inspired by the 80s movie Return to Oz. So we start off in the country of the Gillikins in the north of Oz, which is the only place that we didn't go to before. And we start with two characters, Mombi and Tip. Now, Mombi is also known as the Wicked Witch of the North. She shows up a little bit in the Wicked books, a little bit in Son of a Witch, and then she has a bigger role in Out of Oz, but we'll get to that when we get to those books. And then she also has a young boy that she's raising named Tip. Tip remembers nothing about his parents or how he came to be cared for by Mombi, but she is not a good guardian. She is abusive towards him, overall not great. There's pretty much no material out there about people analyzing the other Oz books after the first one to see if there's political allegory. So again, I will add in my own speculations and opinions, but it's much more likely that the rest of these books are just fairy tales with maybe a little bit of political food for thought here and there. Tip builds Jack Pumpkinhead out of wood with a pumpkin as a prank on Mombi to scare her, but she has actually just come back from meeting with a wizard and getting some suspicious products, and one of them is the Powder of Life. So she casts a spell, tests it out on Jack Pumpkinhead, and accidentally brings him to life. And then she spends all night brewing a potion that is going to turn Tip into a marble statue, but it can only be consumed when it's cooled down. So she says, well, we're gonna wait until the morning, and then you are getting turned into a marble statue that I'm gonna put in my yard. Tip's not really on board with that, so he decides to grab the now sentient Jack Pumpkinhead and run away. Also, I don't want to skip over this picture. Now, for a guy who just came to life, Jack Pumpkinhead has some bangers, some just really hard lines in these first 40 pages. First, he is asked, "What do you know?" And he says, "Well, that is hard to tell. For although I feel that I know a tremendous lot, I am not yet aware how much there is in the world to find out about. It will take me a little time to discover whether I am very wise or very foolish." When he finds out that he was built by Tip, he starts calling him his father and says, "Then I owe you obedience and you owe me support." Just an interesting take on the parent-child relationship. Now, they don't really know where they're gonna go. They just know they need to be away. So they decide to go to the Emerald City, and they follow another yellow brick road that takes them there. And before we leave Gillikin Country, I just wanna mention, every other region of Oz has had a specific color that defines it. For Gillikin Country, it's purple. And Gillikin Country is a very aristocratic, wealthy part of Oz, and purple has historically been used to represent nobility, partly because I guess the dye was really expensive back in the day. So I think that makes sense. I feel like it's sort of meant to represent northern elites, and this is a stretch, but I kind of feel like Jack Pumpkinhead might be intended to represent Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, who was a big abolitionist, partly because A, he came from the north to Washington or the Emerald City to fight for his agenda, and also when I looked up American politician Pumpkinhead, the two names that came up for whatever reason were Calvin Coolidge, who had not had his presidency by the time this book came out, and Charles Sumner. I could not, for the life of me, find a specific quote where someone associated him with a pumpkin or called him a pumpkinhead. So like I said, it's a stretch, but Jack Pumpkinhead has this kind of born yesterday thing that gives me the impression that L. Frank Baum might have looked at abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner as someone who maybe was a bit of an idealist and then got to Washington and found out things were not as easy to change as maybe he suspected. With Charles Sumner, he was famously beaten with a cane by another senator. So yeah. Now, Jack Pumpkinhead structurally was not the most masterfully crafted, so his joints get a little tired, and Tip had swiped the Powder of Life, so he decides to make a sawhorse come to life so that Jack Pumpkinhead can ride it. Here's a better picture. He looks unnerving, to say the least. And also, the sentient wooden sawhorse can talk. They end up coming to a river and floating across on the sawhorse to get to the other side where the yellow brick road continues, and Tip says, hey, maybe you should get the sawhorse to run really fast and then you can dry off faster. So he does, but Tip is not able to keep up and he's left behind. Jack Pumpkinhead gets to the Emerald City, realizes for the first time that Tip is gone, says he doesn't really know why he's here, and they just decide, okay, we're going to take you to go see the Scarecrow. Now, the Scarecrow, for whatever reason, is still enforcing the everyone has to wear green spectacles thing. Seems like he might be taking after the wizard a bit. And then they have this kind of funny interaction where Jack Pumpkinhead is like, oh, I speak the language of Gillikin Country, that's where I was made, so we're not going to be able to understand each other. And the Scarecrow, clearly understanding him, says, oh, well, that's unfortunate. Maybe we should get an interpreter. So they get the little girl who was an Emerald City attendant who was not named in the first book to come visit. The Scarecrow gets Jack Pumpkinhead to sit down. And then Jellia Jam, the green girl who isn't really green, it's just with the glasses, they get her to come interpret for them, and she plays a joke on them and twists around their words because she's like, of course you can understand each other. There's only one language that we speak in Oz. I feel like maybe this is meant to represent ineffectual bureaucracy, you know, how everything is getting unnecessarily slowed down in Washington. And since she has all these J names, I wonder if this is referencing yellow journalism. So journalists twisting words, making things over sensationalized, basically clickbait for newspapers. This was a really big issue around the Spanish-American War. Eventually they realize they can understand each other just fine, and they decide, hey, we are two weird, sentient, humanoid beings. We should be friends. And we close out the chapter with another banger from Pumpkinhead Jack. I assure your majesty that I did not ask to be created. Me too, man. See you tomorrow for part 2.